Next is Mechthild Hart. She's not from Austria, but from Germany, instead is from what's written on the program. She's going to talk to us about giving, taking, giving back, and ecocentric gift economy.
In her book, a collection of essays called Pilgrimages or Peregrinajes, and it means you theorize on the pedestrian level, and you hang out with different people to talk, to discuss, to contest, to argue. I also want to start with the notion of pilgrimage to connect to what Paula was saying, that we are in a place of transition. Where are we? Are we an in-between place? And what can we do in this in-between place, aside from digging up the past, looking at it, celebrating it, and envisioning a future that is more like a livable world, but also what are we doing here? So let me start with food. Carol Merchant, whose book has influenced me, she said, an ecosystem is a food web, not a food pyramid with humans at the top. And Vandana Shiva in Earth Democracy, another book that inspired me, that ecological security is our most basic security. Ecological identity is our most fundamental identity. We are the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe. Food, its cultivation, preparation, cultural celebration, its material, biological foundation, the tools for its preparation, its symbolism, its spiritual or religious significance, its rituals, all of this brings together most vividly and most sensually the intricate weave of organic and inorganic, the biotic, the abiotic, the human and the non-human, or more than human life, of raw and transformed life. Transforming nature for human use implies human labor. That's where the economic part comes in. It requires concrete, intimate knowledge of local bioregional conditions, of the actual offerings, but also possibilities of these conditions or realities, how humans can draw on them, take them, sustain or enhance their fertility, and restore them in case the self-regulating powers, which they do have been damaged by human interference. This requires purposeful, respectful, careful use of offerings and potentialities. I'm now streetwalking into capitalist patriarchy, which has relentlessly been destroying the conditions of life, of living, resulting in ecological and social cultural disasters. Many seeds have now been patented. Preserving them from harvest to harvest has become a crime, illegal. Indigenous knowledge of properties and medicinal powers of herbs and plants have likewise been branded as the private property of pharmaceutical companies. So seeds and all related knowledges have been sucked into the logic of the market. I leave a few things out here. The capitalist dimension of capitalist patriarchy, there's capitalism, there's patriarchy, the one that fragments, that what Lugones says, separates, tears apart, and exchanges on the market corresponding fragments of life, or conglomerates of such fragments, claiming that these pieces improve or enrich life. The pieces and fragments prepared and shaped by the logic of the market are barely alive themselves, are sick, tortured, mass-produced animals with their beaks cut off, creatures who stand all day and night in their own feces because there's no space to move, being given fodder laced with antibiotics and the mashed brains of their fellow creatures who had died of infections because antibiotics were no longer effective. They end up as neatly packaged pieces of food. The food on glamorous display on the supermarkets is not only already dead, but also ultimately deadening. for the consumers is filled with growth hormones, pesticides, herbicides, and hundreds of chemical compounds. The food produced and sold by agribusiness is integral to what someone has called a book written about the diet for a dead planet. We could say that capitalist drive for financial gain at all cost is what makes toxic food profitable and what also makes it so appealing to people who are entirely disconnected from nature, from any form of productive and creative interaction with the material biological conditions of life, or who can only survive by scavenging the growing garbage heaps of a culture of disposables. I will leave out the issue of genetic modification, which is also transgenic, the different parts of different organisms are transplanted, like from a flounder into a tomato, so it makes it more cold resistant. And also animals, you see pigs with cow feet, but they can barely stand, etc. So underneath the freewheeling exploitation, now coming to the patriarchal part, of the material foundation of real life and the ruthless violation of the integrity of life forms lurks, however, another deeper lying and more life-threatening force. Is it expressed in what Claudia von Werhoff describes as the patriarchal dream of freeing those in power from their dependence on the female body on giving birth to new life? Genetic engineering holds the promise of realizing this dream. It promises the ability of creating custom-made children according to the vision of what Maria Lugones calls the lovers of purity, the Western patriarchal, superhuman, lawful rulers. This dream is already alive in the pure, immaterial stratosphere of finance capitalism. Here, money begets money, which begets money, all seemingly out of nothing, but out of pure financial abstractions, removed from anything concrete, material or bodily, and to possess money or capital means to possess and trade life. The bodiless, pure spirit of finance capitalism gives rise to the underlying patriarchal illusion of ultimately being able to replace the self-creating, self-renewing first nature with pure money, and ultimately creating a birthing machine to substitute for the birthing bodies which the patriarchs, the lovers of purity, are still dependent on. This is what makes them angry, not scared, angry. This dream is still a dream, but a lived nightmarish reality for real bodies who do real, material, place-bound, physical work in and on the natural, biological underground of life, the blood, guts, and gore that leaks out of messy bodies. Their impurity has to be kept in check. They and their exploitation have to stay out of public sight, invisible, private, desexualized, or real bodies have to serve patriarchal men by becoming public goods, commodities that can be officially, publicly traded, displayed, or home delivered like pizza. I'm switching now to my work with Latina immigrant domestic workers in Chicago, where I live. And I've been working with them over the past 5 years. The workers experience multiple tensions, conflicts, and what Lugones calls interlocking and intermeshing oppressions that mirror the patriarchal hatred of the real that is always messy, unruly, unpredictable, real material life. Within the enclosure of Western patriarchal mind-body dualism, the closer one moves to the body in its simple real-life kind of way, the less valuable and the more usable it becomes for those living in it. The further a person's class, color, national origin, or gender removes her from the category that symbolizes the pinnacle of purity, the closer she gets to the merely physical or bodily, to the impure, to dirt. Women's work is also brown work, low-class work, immigrant work. Briefly, I'll make it very short, so in order to come to the main point, not run out of time, is also that there are hierarchies in Chicago, for instance. An immigrant, non-English speaking, East European nanny gets paid more than an undocumented. She's also undocumented Latina nanny. Not only does she get less money, the Latina nanny, but she also needs to always do housework. So a Romanian nanny, I had conversations with in the park, said, I only do babysitting. The very term already made my set red flags. Babysitting? You just sit and over baby? But so, she said, I only do babysitting, but all the Latina niñeras always had to do the dirty work, the household chores, the cleaning, the washing, the doing the laundry, the ironing, which is a hard labor. Okay. It is precisely because it requires a tremendous. Oh no, neither. Okay, sorry, I'm leaving out. I'm leaping over streets. I need to go back to the street I was walking on. It's precisely because it requires a tremendous amount of physical labor, irrespective of how interlaced it is with psychological, emotional, intellectual labor, that care work gets equated with walking the dog or cleaning the house. The Illinois, where the state I live in, there is all the same. You walk the dog, you clean the house, you do the laundry, you babysit. It's in the same level. In other words, the social financial value of domestic work is ultimately based on the fact that it has a pronounced physical component, regardless of the complex and sophisticated mix of knowledges and abilities it requires as well. Now I'm going to strategic gifting and bridges to power. I am non-Latina, white, and middle class, and an academic. Amy Rowe in Power Lines, a book she wrote, discusses transracial alliance building. She suggests that looking at crisscrossing power lines assists us in seeing how we are connected across time and space, how we communicate with each other or build community, but also how we can shape the world within and against power relations. But this requires a radical reconfiguration of what constitutes power, one that accounts for diverse resources to serve as the basis for alliance formation. Access to institutional power is one of the resources I am in possession of and clearly benefit from. I have been transposing these privileges into political responsibilities, trying to rework them into power lines that productively crisscross the academic world with the world kept hidden in the home workplace. I'm trying to build bridges to power. I'm therefore part of an alliance where my building bridges to power crisscrosses with the women workers building bridges to community. All of us are using our power lines to establish connection, to speak, to listen to, engage in what Rowe so aptly calls the politics of becoming. How much time do I have?
Almost 8 minutes.
Okay. I'll tell you a story and then I'll skip a few things. Maybe if I have time for the story. Because the point is, what I learned from Maria Lugones, if you ever have a chance to read her, she's not an easy read, she's a philosopher, but she brings things together in a way that I've for decades been trying to put in words. She has a notion of curdling. If any one of you had tried to make mayonnaise, it comes from making mayonnaise. She names what does not fit the available classification of things as being curdled, as being in a state of mestizaje, of both impurity and resistance. And that combination, to me, is so amazing. She uses the practice of making mayonnaise to illustrate the meaning of curdling. It requires to separate the yolk from the egg white, a difficult process that often leaves an egg white with tiny bits of yolk that are impossible to remove, thus making it impure. This is the curdling that speaks of a tried but failed act of separation. By adding oil and water to the yolk, curdling refers to an emulsion where the ingredients don't blend well, become separate sort of, but not really, since they tend to coalesce more in the direction of one or the other ingredient. That's where you are left with yolky oil or oily yolk. This is the impure that signifies a traveling between different worlds, a curdling that has strong resistive qualities. Mothering or mother work powerfully illustrates the transformative power of curdling. On the most direct basic level, mother work requires a curdling of the affective and the physical, the dirt of life with the joy of seeing life grow, the physical chores of body care with the sensual enchantment of loving touch. Anyone who has worked with small children knows that they are not yet lovers of purity. Their parents may just have started training them to split separate their love impurely with all their senses in motion, still open for endless possibilities. They give loving attention to their niñera, their substitute mother. Doing care work in a home that is crisscrossed by cultural and patriarchal demarcations and lines of separation therefore means receiving intense training in making vital epistemological and ethical shifts that allow us to see love and care across profound differences. In other words, the fraction of home is here reworked as a world within worlds, Lukone says, that can be traveled lovingly. Mobile substitute mothers are engaged in resistive curdling on many levels. The mother who had to leave her children back home and allows herself to feel affection for the children in her care, resists property relations by trespassing into another mother's territory. She creatively appropriates a space in order to give loving care, of using it as a source of playful, emotional involvement. During my visits to the park, I observed this type of involvement on numerous occasions. Often the women I had conversations with interrupted their rather painful or angry work stories to give full loving attention to the child and their care, or to actively play with them while I was talking to another niñera. Okay, let's see, 5 more minutes? 4. Wow, now I'm coming to the main point.
Good job.
Okay, from the gift economy to the living economy. The gift economy, I leave out who influenced me for this one. Okay, this is the academic stuff. You always have to give credence to the people who influenced you. I do it in footnotes. So if you want to know who they are, I tell you. And I'm also going to do what I tell my students how to do. Write in run-on sentences. I will speak in run-off sentences. The gift economy is a notion that sees us in relation. Being in relation means to be able to see the other unilaterally as someone in need of our gift, or someone we just want to give a gift as a way to affirm her and our being in relation with her. Not so good. Within the parameters of the gift paradigm, our relational dependence on the other to givingly, non-calculating respond to our needs for food, for shelter, for comfort, for friendship, for love, is replicated in the image of Earth Mother giving to our needs. The problem with this image is that it screens out some important issues. Yes, we are in relation with each other and with nature, but not only in a gendered mothering way. There are 2 elements in our relation to nature, to Earth, that are not sufficiently acknowledged or are directly bypassed by the image of Mother Earth and by the mother-child dyad that's so central to the gift paradigm. First, we are entirely dependent on nature for our survival. We could not even be in relation with each other without nature. Because we have a material, biological, physical foundation, because we are embodied beings, we simply need her offerings. Second, nature does not need us, and she would do very well surviving without human interference. She also does not always give. She at times unleashes her rather unpredictable powers on us, killing us, devouring us. In other words, she's an autonomous being, and how we relate to her depends on our worldview, our cosmology. As humans, we have a will, and that is what separates us from nature. It gives us the power to destroy or to sustain, depending on how we see, experience, and construct our dependence on the earth. Okay. 3 more minutes? Okay. I leave out the curling. Okay. By living against the logic of purity or patriarchy, the patriarchal mind-body dualism, mothering is also a form of resistive curdling, one that tells us that we cannot ignore the blood, guts, and core of life. We cannot separate from the clean, the pure, the white, and the shiny when we want to create a livable world, a living economy. In our resistive curdling, and not talking about us right now, where we're here, our dependence on nature coalesces with carefully, playfully, or creatively interacting with nature, with life, with embodied beings. It also curdles seeing ourselves and each other as autonomous beings in relation. Individual autonomy in being in relation always is in a state of curdling. Sometimes the mixture coalesces more towards oily yolk, sometimes more towards yolk, or I leave it up to you which one is autonomy, which one is interrelations. As embodied culture beings, we therefore have to learn to live and to love impurely, crisscrossing the cultural patriarchal divides and separations. We have to, this is a term from Maria Lugones I just love, we have to hang out with each other in spaces such as these created by this conference. She calls it a streetwalker hangout. It is where people engage in various on-the-ground pedestrian struggles. Once in a while, they meet, they have encuentros. A hangout is a place for coming together with others who bring different worlds into los encuentros, different understandings, different vocabularies, different gestures. It is a space that is always in the process of becoming. And I end with a quote from Lugones. Hangouts are highly fluid, worldly, non-sanctioned, communicative occupations of space, contestatory retreats for the passing of knowledge, for the tactical, strategic fashioning of multi-vocal sense, of enigmatic vocabularies and gestures, for the development of keen commentaries on structural pressures and gaps, spaces of complex and open-ended recognition. Hangouts are spaces that cannot be kept captive by the private-public split. They are worldly, contestatory, concrete spaces with geographies sieged by and in defiance of logics and structures of domination. It gives me hope, this is now my words, to look at our conference as a hangout where we resist the logic of purity and domination and where we engage in resistive curdling.